Ryan from Bushcraft. So you saw the highlight video from Karamat when I went up there go see Moors. Cold weather is coming. Actually, there's a little bit of nip in the air right now. It's kind of chilly and I got a cold. So I'm actually wearing a hat. You know, a hat in some instances can be the equivalent of wearing a warm sweater to help you stay warm and maintain your body's core temperature. The next series of videos that you're going to see, there's going to be at least 4 of them, maybe 3 of them, depending on how I edit it out. There's going to be Moors, and he's going to be talking about clothing and how to keep yourself warm using different layering techniques and different things that are going to help you. They're going to be a little bit longer, and they are going to be a discussion, and it's going to be Moors, and he's going to be talking. We all watch TV. You know, watching 17 minutes of Moors is not going to kill you. And the way that I would look at it, when I see a longer video like that, I take a notebook out, I grab a cup of coffee, I watch it, and I take notes. Anyway, so let's get going with it. Here's Moors on clothing. I hope you enjoy the series, and we'll talk to you a little bit later.
Yeah, I've got the manuscript from my book on clothing, so I was going to use it as a little bit of a guide too. I don't think, did Kelly say much about clothing?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Yeah, you talk a little bit.
That's a good start. The issue, you've got one handout which is a chart about clothing thicknesses, because the interesting thing is, thank God for small mercies and whatever, that insulation is directly proportionate to thickness, regardless of what the insulation is made of. So it makes it easier for people to have an idea that when you are going up a heavy hill, pulling a toboggan, wearing snowshoes, churning in the snow, if you're wearing that much clothing, you might be getting so warm that your skin is flooded with moisture. And that same night as you're laying still, you need a sleeping bag. I can't even maybe that thick around you to keep you warm. So the more you exert yourself, the less clothing you might need, or the consequence you drench, you start to sweat. If you put today you can buy a thermometer for probably less than $10, and it's got a wire about this long that's meant to go outside. The thermometer will give you the inside temperature in your house and the outside temperature. Or that long thing, stick it in your armpit or your crotch or your nose or up your ear, and you'll get the temperature that's going on there. And it's so easy to take that thermometer, which is also a clock, and position it, and maybe it's put in your armpit. And when your armpit starts to approach 31 degrees Celsius, when it reaches 31, it's going to start flooding the skin with moisture to cool you down. The body can tolerate an extreme amount of chilling without damage, but it cannot tolerate 5 degrees above normal body temperature is extremely destructive. So for mankind to survive on the face of the earth, the bodies that succeeded and lasted the longest are the ones that reacted violently to any increase in temperature. 5-degree increase in body temperature for, let's say, 15 minutes, it's apt to destroy most of your brain cells. The brain function is so sensitive to high temperatures, so you gotta sort of understand that. Now, I brought my manuscript on account that I could sort of run through it and just touch upon the headings, and hopefully my son and I will have this out within a year, I hope, because I have a lot of editing to do. The other marvelous thing about this particular book is that I've written it probably 3 times already, and each time it would be like reading someone else's book and catching all the awkward expressions. You're becoming a self-editor there. Clothing and survival in a cold climate. People guess that man first developed in the warm grasslands of East Africa 750,000 years ago during the Paleolithic, and also spent considerable time in the tropics or subtropics where thick body hair was a disadvantage. There's a whole article, a whole big 10 or 15-page article in Scientific American a few years ago talks about why we don't have hair, which is very interesting to know when we would say, hey, maybe it would have been better if we retained our hair like dogs and horses and cattle and gorillas do, so that we wouldn't have to wear clothes. But if that happened, we would have been confined to a very strict environment. But when we began to lose our hair, we could colonize every niche found on the surface of the earth. And there are places where you could survive nude 365 days of the year, and there are places where it's impossible for man to live, even though it's still on the surface of the earth because of the conditions. Yeah, so through the invention of clothing, man eventually developed the capability of settling anywhere to circumvent this ancient genetic heritage that pegs them as a biological misfit for a considerable portion of the planet. Man is capable of living anywhere as long as he maintains a prescribed constant internal body environment within precisely defined limits. So what? So what? I don't want to read the whole book. You won't want to buy it. Now the whole issue is dispersing excessive body heat. You glow to the equivalent of a 150 watt light bulb, and you produce at the same time about 300 British thermal units of heat. If you take the big box of matches, the kitchen matches, it says 250 matches. If you burn that match right from one end to the other, that's 1 British thermal unit, which is the amount of heat that warms a pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. That's the BTU. 150 watts. Well, get yourself a 150 watt light bulb, screw it into a socket somewhere, turn it on, put your hands around it like this and say, wow, that's the amount of warmth that I add to the environment. Same rate as that 150 watt light bulb. So you glow like a 150 watt light bulb, but the difference between you and the light bulb is that you have 3 square meters of skin from which to radiate it, not a tiny filament like is centered in the bulb. But when you know about the 150 watts and the sort of the idea that light bulb, so you say, well, what does this do for me? Well, just imagine taking a t-shirt and saying, what does the t-shirt do for me? Take a 150 watt light bulb and wrap it with a t-shirt and you'll get a rough idea. The only thing is that because it's so concentrated, the t-shirt is likely going to start smoking on you. But there are very sensitive greenhouses that, in order to not put the interior environment out of balance, when you enter, you turn off a 150 watt light bulb. When you exit, you turn it on again. And by doing that, you can not create sudden additions of heat and so forth. So basically, you disperse heat by glowing, and the other way is by flooding your skin with moisture so that you get the benefit of the powerful refrigerative effect of evaporation. When skin temperature rises to 31 degrees Celsius, sweating becomes a major means of cooling. And if you sweat excessively because you're not dressed properly, you'll be wearing 25 pounds of wool if you're dressed to work at 40 below. And you'll find that very likely, if you're a normal person not being really attentive, in about 3 or 4 days, there'll be 15 pounds of frost that's accumulated in your clothing. And it's very hard for your body to keep you warm if that frost is lodged in your clothing. So at 25 degrees Celsius, the evaporation of 1 gram of water withdraws 582 gram calories or 225 BTUs of heat. And that's by which allows us to be able to cope with desert environments and other warm conditions. So you got to understand that mechanism in order to design clothing and act and use that clothing. Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll come to that here in a moment. The issue is that first of all, uh, I think the learner has to have an idea. I mean, I don't know if I brought it to the attention that I had a piece of caribou hide and I had it folded, and when I folded it so that the hair is outside on both sides, so there's hide against hide. So the Eskimo makes a suit that the hair rubs the skin, and the second layer the hair faces the outside. And that I said that it'd probably be very difficult to design modern clothing with modern fabrics to emulate that action. Now when the frost accumulates in your layers and layers, sufficient layers of wool, then as I say, in 3-4 days, the Swedish Army experimented with this a great deal, and I get a lot of my information there. They would weigh you before you left, and they would put you through certain levels of exertion under various temperature conditions, and then immediately on returning, your clothing was weighed to see what you accumulated. And basically, it's 25 pounds of wool is required to be comfortable at 40 below, and in 3 or 4 days, you've got an additional 15 pounds of frost in that clothing. And that's not like a lot of people figure, well, pints a pound, that's 15 pints of water, that moisture that's lodged in your clothing, and they're credulous, or they don't believe you. And I tell you, well, what you believe and don't believe is your own worst enemy. If you go about acquiring your knowledge in the right way, you'll know that happens. It isn't a basis of belief. It's a basis of the fact that does happen when you get everything right. So when you're wearing wool and you're dressed correctly, the issue of the oomph that your body produces to send the moist, warm air outward, when the temperature reaches a certain critical point, that coldness penetrates into your clothing and doesn't allow, that's where the frost forms. And above a certain temperature, it gets beyond the boundaries of your clothing. So probably at, at 20 degrees of freezing, your activity and periodically standing near a fire, and you don't have that accumulation. But if you're doing everything exactly to make it accumulate, well, you can define the circumstances, and you're going to have that problem. And so 25 pounds of wool that's saturated with 15 pounds of frost is awfully hard for the body to be able to stay warm under those circumstances. So basically your notion is, your so-called breathable fabrics, which should be never I would always say the term vapor permeable, and maybe I don't want to bring up Gore-Tex, because there's a guy named Wigatow, he would make outlandish statements that the Gore-Tex people threatened to sue him for bad-mouthing their product. And he said, yes, I would love it if you could take me to court and prove in court that what you say is true. And their lawyers would look at this and say, there's no way that a lawyer has enough fundamental purchase to be able to disprove or to prove that Gore-Tex works the way they say it does. And the more I read about diffusion and how moisture acts and so on, the more I cannot understand how Gore-Tex can function. But nonetheless, that's a big name that earns a lot of money for the people who promote it. And there are two classes of people in the world. There are people that would rather wear 6 mil polyethylene than Gore-Tex, and then there are people who wear Gore-Tex. But you'll notice that the people who wear Gore-Tex are the ones who live in Winnebagos, and they don't tent very much. And when it starts to get miserable, they jump in their Winnebago and go home. And the tenters who finally say, well, I can't go home now, my tent is soaking wet, we're going to have to wait till the rain stops and dries out and so on. Those people despise Gore-Tex because they discover that all the hype that they were led to believe was supposed to be the truth about such a thing didn't seem to work for them, and on and on. But that's another story. Insulation.
Can I ask just how do you know when you got this buildup of frost in your clothing? How
By
do
the
you know?
weight.
Just by the weight.
And the coldness.
So when
There's
you start
frost
getting
and
cold,
weight
then
and
that's your
heaviness. So you're wearing 25 pounds of wool, and you're going to start noticing when you've got 5 pounds more, and when you're wearing as much as the clothing can bear, which is 15 pounds, you'll feel the weight. But also you will, if you really pay attention to not generate too much sweat and all kinds of other things, and if you're a fair weather camper, you never notice this, but one day you're caught out there and it turns 45, 50 below, that's where you're caught up on things you weren't warned about, and you might have not known why. That's a complicated question. It's enough to stump me. Anyway. Okay, so dry. Clothing insulation. Dry insulation compared to wet. Wind and wet.